my name's Brianna, and I'm actually sitting here on vacation on my back porch in Florida right now. So I hope that this goes through okay and that my GoPro works for this because my phone wasn't cooperating. So I did my paper on nepotism within the workplace and how it can influence the decision-making process. I'll also touch on things like ethical blindness because I feel that that pertains to nepotism, and different prevention methods and different ways to combat these types of issues within the workplace. Throughout my paper, I'll also explore just different journals and academic sources that are important to those. Also along with ethics in the workplace, ethical decision making in general, and just how all of these are going to impact that. So for just simplicity, nepotism is basically favoriting a friend or family member within a professional setting. It's a very gray area within professionalism, and it can be acceptable in certain cases, which is something that I didn't necessarily think about. But I feel that in most cases it is unethical and it is unacceptable because it creates a lot of problems, and there is a lot of different ways to perceive nepotism, I feel. It can be due to things such as ethical blindness. That is why this is being utilized within businesses. I feel that also whenever individuals are unaware that they're making these types of decisions, there's a great chance that these two things between ethical blindness and nepotism, that there's going to be a negative effect on the decision-making process. So nepotism is defined by the United States Legal Dictionary in the workplace as showing favoritism towards one family members or friends in an economic or employment term. Although this definition is pretty broad and it may encompass a lot, I feel that it's a very clear picture of what nepotism actually is within the workplace. Depending upon the type of organization or business that's being looked upon, however, nepotism is not always viewed in such a harsh manner. For example, family-owned businesses, they are going to continue to keep that family running within the family. So whenever they are to hire a son or a daughter or a granddaughter or niece, nephew, and so on, that is not viewed upon negatively. That is actually a good thing because that is what they would like to do. They would like to pass that business down through family members. So when looking at it that way, nepotism has not such a negative effect on the decision-making process because it is meant to be a good thing in those settings. However, whenever you look at large corporations or organizations that are bigger, they tend to frown upon these types of tactics or influences because of the higher standards of professionalism that they hold. A lot of these places feel that whenever leaders are utilizing nepotism, that there is basically a greater chance for the morale of employees to lower, and that will lead to unethical decisions being made essentially. So from there, a lot of these corporations have instituted anti-nepotism policies to prevent close friends and relatives and such from either working in the same office or working in the same firm within an organization. So basically they're just trying to prevent it from getting too serious. I feel that sometimes within these anti-nepotism policies that they could probably be a little bit more strict, but I think that it's just hard to divert it completely from nepotism because you do not always know it's there. So stemming from that, there are a lot of ethical dilemmas that I could have spoke about within my paper that are related to nepotism. However, I felt that it was important. Whenever I was coming across my research, I found a quote from Aristotle, which shocked me because that was the last person I was thinking of when writing this paper. However, I felt that it was very pertinent to ethics and nepotism. He stated that equals should be treated equally and unequals unequally. So essentially, whenever you're dealing with ethics, one of the most basic backbones to that topic is fairness and being fair. So whenever a company or a business is utilizing nepotism or favoritism, then they're basically degrading and interfering with that idea of fairness and ethics. So that perceived favoritism of an employee from a supervisor can essentially cause a lot of distrust and dissatisfaction within a workplace, and that in essence can lower productivity, morale, you name it, because whenever these employees feel that they are putting in the same amount of work as a co-employee is, and they are not climbing the ladder as quickly or something of that nature, they are essentially going to be pretty upset, and they're not going to feel that same amount of trust. They're not going to feel the same relationship with that supervisor that the other person has, just because they have that outside of personal relationship going on. So another example that I could use for an ethical dilemma that can arise from nepotism is, I found a lot of cases online dealing with lawsuits, which actually shocked me, because when you think nepotism, I don't think that there is anything that would arise from a lawsuit. However, like I said, and like everyone follows and goes by, perception is key through everything in life. Everyone is going to have a different view on something, and it's important to understand that, because you have to be able to see all points of view, especially within a business setting. And so whenever nepotism is being utilized within a work setting, there's a really high chance that people are going to view that as a hostile work environment, or even possibly discriminatory, because like I said before, if two employees are putting in the same type of work but another is getting pushed to the side while the other is climbing the ladder just because he or she knows or is related to their supervisor, then they may view that in that manner. So that's why it's very important within the workplace to keep a professional mindset in a relationship with all of your coworkers and employees. That is also why within my research I found that a lot of companies don't allow marital relationships to come about within the workplace, essentially because of all the backlash and just chaos that can come with it, because if that relationship fails, it's just difficult for not only those two parties involved, but the entire organization. In those circumstances, it's very hard. It's hard enough being a single person, not utilizing nepotism, but whenever you are having these marital affairs with someone that you work with, it's very hard to leave work at work and home at home whenever you're mixing those two types of relationships. So it's just very hard, and this can cause a lot of ethical dilemmas whenever you are having these types of relationships within the workplace. And it's also a great chance for nepotism and unethical decisions to be made because of not being able to leave work at work and home at home, and mixing in those personal and professional lives. So moving on to ethical blindness, this is basically defined as, from the article that we read it throughout the course of this class, is basically the temporary inability of a decision maker to see the ethical dilemma dimension of a decision at stake. So essentially they kind of stray away from their values, and they just can't see that ethical decision. They just jump to something, and that's what they're going with, and their values and everything that they would normally go by are just pushed to the side momentarily. So they're essentially making a decision through blindness. They're ethically blind because they are kind of pushing ethics and values and everything to the side and just making a decision. There are 3 aspects that go along with that, as stated within the article. The first is that people are going to deviate from their own values and principles, as I stated just a second ago. The second is that this whole thing of ethical blindness is a temporary state. It's not forever. This can be a one situation type thing, or it could even just be, it could go on for a while, but it is temporary, and these people will bounce back from this, and they may realize that they had made those unethical decisions. The last is that these decisions, this ethical blindness, is unconscious, which is the most dangerous part of it, I feel, for businesses whenever you have employees who are ethically blind and they make decisions like this, because if they don't know that they're doing it and they're doing it unconsciously, then that is what's so dangerous. So these are all just really important things to be considered whenever you're working through ethics within an organization and trying to control things like nepotism and trying to have the best ethical decision-making processes going on that you can. So There are other ways that you can go about preventing or combating these types of things regarding ethical blindness and nepotism. It's difficult, but I think that there are pretty simple things that can be utilized in order to make sure that these things go a little bit more smoothly. So to prevent them, I feel that a lot of organizations are going to overthink this, but I feel that by increasing ethical awareness, developing a moral imagination, and becoming better at promoting dissent within the workplace, these three things will help any organization prevent these types of things from happening. So increasing ethical awareness, I think that this should happen within every organization, regardless of whether or not they feel they have a problem. I feel that whenever you are aware of something, of what it is, that is going to help prevent that ethical blindness that is happening unconsciously. It may bring some things to surface that people have not thought about before, which is really important. I also feel that the implementation of moral imagination is important, which this is more or less just the concept of looking at all possibilities and all other views at a situation before coming to that decision. So using perception, putting yourself in other people's shoes, and really looking at all the hard facts before coming to that decision. And that's really important in a professional setting because you're not always right, and sometimes it's hard to admit that. So I think that's important to note. The last is actively promoting dissent. And I think this is also very important because this comes back to perception. So whenever a leader is come to face an ethical dilemma and they're trying to come up to a decision, most people feel that leaders or supervisors within the workplace need to have all the answers. They need to have all their stuff together like that. However, whenever they are able to